toward the One, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance. Well, welcome to our third class in this series, and would very much like to share some things about creation with you today. In fact, thinking about how you have a lot to do with the creation of the whole universe. I'm going to begin with something that Pure Zia shared with us that went to the retreat on Mustang Island recently. These are some things he said about the careful, loving way that Creator created us in the beginning. We were brought forth specifically to the minutest atom in our being, molded on an image of God. With hands in clay, God touched, smoothed, delineated with total absorption in the art, purposely inspired to create each one of us. Is there a better image of love? To be made by the divine hands, delicately molded, with wakeful eyes face to face. To know it in one's bones is to be loved. We don't need anything else. So that's probably true, that we don't need anything else. That's the most important thing that we have. But we have more, and we can speak of more, especially about our participation in the creation. So we're going to start with discussing the planes through which we came in order to be manifest. I had some people asking too about this. What are the planes according to the Sufis, or the realms through which we were manifest? So I'm going to give them a list of them and the names that are used for you. The one that is closest to the divine being and highest in the realms is called Hahut, H-A-H-U-T. And usually what people say about this is nothing, because it transcends description. So this is really in the mystery itself. This is really nothing much manifested, anything that you could put a name onto. Very highest of the heavens. The next one that through which we came on our manifestation was Lahut, L-A-H-U-T, the plane of the archetypes. This is the plane also of the wazifas, wazaif, or the sacred words that we say in our meditation. So look what a high realm that this resonates with when we work on our sacred words. It opens up one of the highest heavens, Lahut. The next one would be Jabarut. This is the angelic plane. It's spelled J-A-B-A-R-U-T. The angelic plane. In this plane, the soul alights into uniqueness on the journey away, on the way back. So this is the source of our uniqueness, our angelic self. Each one being separate, different than the other. So we come into some differentiation now into this realm as we're coming into existence. The next realm down is Malachoot, M-A-L-A-K-U-T. It's the mental plane. It's the jinn plane, sometimes called, which means genius. And it's also the world of the, the dream, the dream world. So it's a realm of images, stories, probably some of the visionary recitals that we speak about would begin in this Malachoot plane. And the plane that we are most familiar with is called Nasut, N-A-S-U-T. And this is called the material plane. It's also called the plane of the five senses, meaning those senses that you studied in 5th grade probably. However, we have many more senses that we've been learning about in our spiritual practices. Nasut is also the plane that we say is has entropy, runs down. Our bodies that we think of as our bodies definitely are running down. There's little things here and there that many of us have noticed, and things that are created also are subject to entropy or coming apart, being disintegrated. But that which we see, which we think of the most as our bodies, as the beauty that around us, we usually are perceiving the image behind what we see, that which is manifest in what we see. And so we really do experience all of these planes in our daily lives. It doesn't take spiritual practice to actually perceive the beauty around us, to perceive the compassion, to perceive everything that we might find in the higher realms. But that's because they are reflected in the surface of the Nasut. Not that they have, that all of these things end with the disintegration of this plane itself, or the change of this plane itself. So what is valuable to this discussion, hopefully, is, you know, we've discussed earlier in this earlier class before this this series that we are human divine creatures, and we need to come to the level of a responsibility, having this ability. And one of the things that we had said that we could use in the process with the divine was our visionary creative process. This is something we spoke about in the Zoroastrian work, the part that really is called Sventarmitic in the Zoroastrian tradition, which means taking on the manner of the archangel of the earth, and being able to see with these deeper senses, to be able to create. And today you'll find out more now about, so how can we create? Wasn't everything created a long time ago, and how do I have anything to do with this? Well, you may know, and I'm happy to say, that this creation is recurrent. It's happening every instant. And how can that be? Well, somehow there's a circulation of consciousness all the way through all of these planes that I spoke about, all the way through from the beginning with the hidden treasure, as it says in the Quran, yearning to be known, yearning to be loved, that burst out from the mystery, from the place of beyond into existence, because there was no encounter in the mystery. There was no opportunity for an unfoldment. There was no opportunity for all the things and the multitudes that we see in the Nasut, creative world. And it was like Pirzia said, it was like the oak acorn that was aching to become the tree, this incredible tree. So it needed to be manifest in order for this to happen. And all of this delicate work that we spoke about as the divine created each one of us, it was in love and in the anticipation of what could happen in creation. And knowing that there was going to be a return to this condition, not only in the end of time, but in the end of every instant. So if we think of ourselves as cooperating with the creative process, that we are in manifestation with so many things that we have adapted to, that we've learned, that we have perfected. And then the yearnings also, the places in us that are always stretching and being compassionate and disappointed and growing from all of these things. The things that are developed in this process of manifestation are given to us. And in the learnings that we have, we're learning how to return these gifts. How do we return what it is that we have learned? Do we make a monument or write a book or create a piece of art? Well, you know what? I'd say yes to all of these, but not because what you might be thinking, not because of what it looks like on the material plane, but because of what creation does within us. It is part of our training here again, becoming this one who can be the manifest divine human, taking our responsibility seriously. And in order to do that, we need an area large enough for this entire huge story. How can it be reflected? Maybe you could tell the story about needing enough interface.
Well, we've talked in the previous classes about something called Bekenstein's bound. And he's a mathematician that had a very simple, easy to understand proof that said between any two things in which there's an interface, like each of you has an interface to listen and see us, your computer screen, your phone, your iPad, and so on. He showed that there was a finite amount of information that could go in either direction. There was a limit, and the limit was related to the surface area of the screen. Well, how that applies to what we've been calling the meeting place or the barzakh, depending on what capacity in our own being has been opened up. And what Rabbani Ra is talking about is the different levels in which we continue to exist. We are multidimensional beings, but those other levels are latent or dormant for most of us. So once we awaken to those and can connect them with ourselves and experience the circulation, then we bring much, much more surface area, so to speak, or dimensionality to the meeting place. So not only can we know more of the divine being can know more of us. And more importantly than either side of that is, as a human divine being, what's possible to come through in this co-creative process is much more than it would be if we were in our limited state of being.
So, you know, we've all heard the words fana and baka. And fana is a dissolving or taking away, erasing of some part of ourselves, and often it is about the ego. And then there's a baka, B-A-Q-A, which has to do with that which endures, that which now is replacing what was the fana. Just as if, as you grow as a child, you're fanaing how you were before, and now bakaing the new transformation of this child. And often in meditation and in our retreats, we go through a process of fana and denying all these other things that are in our lives that maybe are in the way, and baka. So it's a transformation process. But in this process we're talking about here, the creative process and thinking about transformation and the movement into creation and then the return movement. The fana in this case is the fana of thinking that the nasut level is all we are. If we think that only this material self is us, my goodness, we were just talking about surface area. There's not enough room for this whole story to be played out, for our whole creative process to be working. So we need to fana the thinking of myself as only this one level. and baka in knowing what recurrent creation is. So this is an important step for a creative being that has a visionary creative process, or has the thought of wisdom, or has himma, and has an obligation and a challenge from the divine saying, hey, why don't you play with me? Why don't you reach out to me? So it doesn't even make sense from the way that we think of ourselves usually. It's like this little bitty being. When we see pictures of space, we see the earth as this little tiny ball, and then we're little teeny things on that. Well, that kind of vision isn't going to help either. The kind of vision that tells us this whole process is you. You are not separated from the divine. And in this, our creative touch, that uniqueness that we have, touches everything, touches this whole story. Why don't you talk about the encyclopedia?
So some of you may remember the old World Book encyclopedias that if you open up to the section about the human body, had these plastic transparencies, one on top of the other. And if you put them all together, you'd see what the whole inside of the body looked like: the digestive system, the circulatory system, the nervous system, the bones, and so on. But if you just look at one particular page, you would just see that system. You wouldn't see all the rest of it. So imagine if you're trying to understand the workings of the human body, you're a being from another planet, and you just have one of these transparencies to look at, well, you would have a very incomplete picture of what human beings are about. You need to put all the transparencies together. Well, in the same way, imagine that your transparencies are the five senses that we're familiar with, and also there's transparency for your mental concepts, and there's a transparency for your emotions, and there's one for your personality, and that's it. You have all these, and you think, well, I've got it. This is me. This is all that I am. But you're trying to understand the totality of what Pierre Belay would call universe with a capital U, what everything is about. Well, you would be right from the get-go extremely limited in what you could possibly know and understand from your, you could call it your operating system or your frame of reference. You would need to add a whole bunch more transparencies, which would be the capacity to awaken to subtle realms of existence or vibration, and then put those together and have a means of understanding through that, which I'll get to in the second half of this class.
And so in order to help us with this Pir Zia in this Mustang Island retreat I was discussing, had us do practices he called marriages, which would marry us to a next level of consciousness, or the next level of manifestation. So the Nasut part of us having a marriage with the Malachoot, or the dream body, was a certain way to face in our imaginations this part of ourself and say some words. And that was a marriage, a kind of a ceremony or a process that we could go through again and again to help to be able to join these two aspects of our own being. And then there was a marriage at the next level between the Malachoot and the Jabarut, the angelic plane. And there was even a third marriage with the Jabarut, the angelic plane, and the plane of archetypes and light. And in this, I'd like to share with you the one that he did for the first level between the Nasut and the Malachoot. And this is the one where we would say these words: "This is not my body, this is the temple of God." And so not only is it joining two of these levels, it's giving us the, reminding us that this is all God we're speaking about. This is God in this form, and there's God in the next form. And to remember that this is not a separate body, but it is really God's temple. In other words, it is the work of God. All the different forms that we might think about, it's really part of that beautiful temple of God. So there was a motion of the hands that goes with this, and some of you will remember this, that were there. First is crossing from the left to the right, and it's going to look different when I do this. So remember, your left to your right. It's like doing the sign of the cross in a way. They're coming across and saying, this is not my body. And the second part is you start above your head, going down. So the other part of the cross, this is the temple of God. So we're really blessing this formation and thinking about that this is the temple of God. Whatever plane that it's on, it's the temple of God. And so the next part of it is we imagine our dream body facing us. So you could each imagine that in front of you is a dream body. Well, this would be like who you think you are in a dream. And you had many different ones, but you could imagine one of these facing you. And then you imagine that body and you keep your hand, this kind of hand still, but you think of that dream body's hand crossing from its left to its right. His or her right, left to the right, and saying, this is not my body. And then from the top down, imagine the words, this is the temple of God. You imagine them saying it. Okay, now, the best part of it is, it's not really a third part of it, but as you continue doing this, we ask you to imagine that you are the dream body doing the crossing, so that you're really looking at the body, the Nasut body that's sitting in front of you, but you are looking from the eyes of the dream body at this body. And you're saying, this is not my body. Put your cross this way. This is the temple of God. So I hope that that's clear. And we're going to go ahead and do this 5 times. And each time the Nasut body, this body that you came in with, is going to say, this is not my body. This is the temple of God, with the appropriate hand motion. And then you imagine the dream body doing the same thing. Okay, so I'll be saying it, and then you can say it with me. And when we are saying it as the dream body, you won't be hearing anything, unless you can hear your dream body. We'll see.
You don't move your hands either.
No, you won't move your hands either on the dream body. The dream body will be moving her hands. So here we go. This is not my body. This is the temple of God. This is not my body. This is the temple of God. This is not my body. This is the temple of God. This is not my body. This is the temple of God. Now the dream body will say it. Now close your eyes and just feel the feeling of having done this with your dream body. All right, let's open our eyes. Now this can be done at all the different nexes between each realm. So this could be done now, Malachoot to Jabarut. So that would mean you're thinking of your dream body facing your angelic body and doing the same thing. So the physical body will not be moving any hands or, saying anything. This is wonderful exercise for your visionary capacity and your identification on many different realms. So you would go Malachoot to Jabarut, and then the angelic plane, the angel will look toward, you can imagine let's say a beautiful light or an archetype that you identify with, maybe love, harmony, or beauty as an archetypal being. And the angel and this archetypal being or being of light will have their moment. And then finally, the being of light would look up to the Hahut realm, which transcends description, and just feeling that spirit, this closeness to the divine. And imagine how beautiful this experience will be for God to experience. You taking the time to make all the connections all the way up. And I think the last thing I'll leave with you in this section will be, remember what I said earlier about that most of us experience these inner planes through what we see in the world. So every time you begin to see things in the world itself that are reminding you of these realms, that you're celebrating these realms. And you really bring the realms closer as you celebrate them and notice them and love them. So this would be a wonderful experience, just noticing the appearance of the realms within the mirror of this world. Thank you.
Okay, second half of this class is going to be about something called fractals. And before we get into fractals, just let me lay a little bit of groundwork. When we're in a dualistic state of consciousness, which is, we could say, the default setting for most of us and most of the world, in other words, we both experience and perceive ourselves as being separate from everything that we're experiencing. And in science, for up until the 20th century, when quantum physics came along, the scientific model was the scientist in the lab coat, objective, totally not a part of affecting the experiment of what was being observed. And quantum physics came along, and scientists realized that they were changing what they were observing. So they had to have a new way of studying things. Well, similarly, we have to have a different way of understanding what the reality in which we exist is all about, where everything is interconnected with everything else. And another way of saying that is everything is in relationship with everything else. Well, if we want to understand a world in which everything is in relationship, how do we do that? We examine how the relationships unfold in different ways depending on what we bring to the situation, what comes back from that. And that could be a relationship with something in the physical realm, Nazut, as Ravani Ra was talking about. It could be about with a person, it could be about with something in nature. But we also can learn from and investigate and experience our relationship with things in the subtle realms, the other realms of being that Ravani Ra was talking about, all the way up to the transcendent realm, which includes our relationship with what we think of as the divine, the relationship of what we think of as our manifest self with the more subtle levels on which we exist, and so on. So this is the preface to understanding why fractals, I think, are important to understand in this process. Well, in the process of unfolding things through relationship, if you'll recall, in previous classes, we've talked about tawil, harmonic perception, getting into a state of relationship with something where its deeper reality is unfolded to us, is revealed to us. And the only way that happens is if we enter into a state of our own being that is on that same level. We've opened up things to be able to experience that. We've talked about what I call relational unity, a way of experiencing in which we're not separated, but yet in which we experience the uniqueness of our being. That's not lost, but there's a permeability that goes on. Okay. So what is a fractal? So this time we're going to do, this is new, I haven't tried this before. I'm going to try sharing the screen and having some visuals, and hopefully this will work. So bear with me a moment here. So what is a fractal? Fractal refers to a structure that has a pattern that repeats on different levels. And this first one here, some of you may have seen, called the Mandelbrot set, and we're going to actually watch a video of going into this, exploring it. But here's some fractals in nature. Here's the a species of cactus. And by the way, these images come from, the link is up at the top, Global Landscapes Forum. In case you want to explore this on your own, you can copy the link at the top of the screen here and go to it. But I'm just going to briefly go through some of these images. Jackson Pollock was an abstract artist, but mathematicians have analyzed his work, and it all has a fractal patterning to it. This is a fern. You see the repetition in the patterning, the leaves getting smaller and smaller, but it's all similar shape. And here's a snowflake. You see this branching patterning. Here, even waves in the ocean. A snail shell, a spiral, the galaxy, the universe. So you can see all this inherent beauty in nature that follows these patterns. Now I want to go take you through one particular fractal pattern. And this is, there's a simple mathematical equation that generates this structure. And you can download free computer programs where you can play with these. But what someone did is they used one of these programs, and imagine now that you've got a high-powered microscope and you can zoom into millions of levels of magnification. So we're going to go on a little journey through this fractal, and you'll see both the incredible beauty, but also the repetition, but not the same. It's similar, but it's not the same. So I'll just let this play for a little bit. I mean, it's just incredibly beautiful. This is a very simple mathematical equation. And just watch what happens as you're going through this, the finer and finer levels of it. It's like a whole world opens up, and you'll see a repetition of what the much larger structure looks like, and then you zoom in on that. This part looks like something out of Dr. Seuss. So I'll just let this play for a little bit. And again, this comes from the simplest little mathematical equation that if you just saw that, you go, that's pretty boring looking. But you put it into a computer and you see what this equation embodies. It's just absolutely breathtaking. And it goes on forever. There's no end to the levels of magnification you could get to. And then I guess some people have contests, like they've set a new world's record. They've zoomed in like 10 to the 30th power times into this fractal. So you get the idea. All right, so now I'm going to show you another, and this is just a fractal in a plane. If you looked at this as still shot, it would just be sitting there in front of you. It's just two-dimensional. Now we're going to up the ante a bit. So this is a three-dimensional fractal structure, and if you could go through on a journey through this three-dimensional fractal, well, I'll let it speak for itself. And again, you can see the link to this up at the top if you want to find this. And again, you're starting with something, oh, well, that's kind of interesting looking, but then you get into this going through it and magnifying it. And here's another 3D fractal. If you could go right into the thick of it, what it would look like in 3 dimensions. And there's even on YouTube some 4D fractals. If you could go into a 4-dimensional structure projected onto a plane, what it would look like, and it's just unbelievable. It looks like something out of a science fiction movie. Okay, well, maybe that whets your appetite to explore a little more about fractals. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing here. So, what does this have to do with what we're exploring? All right, so let's just take some givens that we're assuming. And science says the same thing. Everything is interconnected with everything else. Everything affects everything else. So you've heard that saying, it comes from chaos theory, the butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon, and then there's a hurricane somewhere across the world. That little tiny change, how it affects everything else. Well, because we are interconnected with everything else, and that interconnection is not only in the physical realm, Nazut, it's in all the realms. So imagine that you are a multidimensional being. Well, you don't have to imagine, you are, and you live in a multidimensional reality in which everything is interconnected with everything else, and everything affects everything else. But it's not just sitting there. It's not like you just have a frozen snapshot of this multidimensional reality and you can see all these little lines connecting everything to everything else. It's always unfolding. It's always in the process of emergence. So what do we have to do with that? Well, we are each unique beings, and you could think, well, on the physical level, well, I'm here and Ravani Ra's over here and we look different and so on. We have different personalities and so on. But our uniqueness also applies to our way of relationship with everything else. Each of us is a unique flavor, so to speak, of the divine being expressing itself in manifestation in relationship with all the other manifestations of the divine being. So each of us embodies a unique modality of relationship. So now imagine like that 3-dimensional fractal moving through there and everything's kind of unfolding. Imagine a multidimensional fractal that represents your being and its many colors and even colors beyond what the physical eyes can see, and vibrations beyond which we can ordinarily experience things. And it's this patterning, beauty beyond measure, jewel-like structure that is connected to everything else. And everything else in existence is its own unique patterning, jewel-like structure in relationship with everything else. So everything is undulating and unfolding with everything else on every level of reality. Now, to the degree that we have awakened to the reality of who we are, and to the degree that we have developed the capacity for experiencing ourselves as multidimensional beings, what that means is instead of feeling a separation, okay, here's my angelic self, I'm going to tune into that. Here's myself in the realm, sometimes the Sufis call the realm of Jinn or genius, the creative realm. Here's myself here. All of that is a part of who I am, and it's all cooking together. So we've got all the transparencies together only these aren't transparencies that are sitting there. They're structures that are circulating, and each part is changing every other part, and so on. So imagine that that is the fractal structure of your being, this living, dynamic templating in relationship with everything else. So what do we do with that? How can we experience that? Well, we can't possibly take in the whole thing at once. So the beauty about fractals is, like the one that I started with, that Mandelbrot set, where there was a pattern and you would magnify it, and then you would see a similarity to the one you started with, and you go down further, and again, you see a similarity. So at every level, there's a similarity. You can understand the nature of the whole structure, even though you can't zoom out to infinity larger or infinitely smaller. You can understand what the whole thing is about by what I call exploring your fractal neighborhood. So in this case, your fractal neighborhood is your realm that you've awakened to, your way of experiencing, your way of understanding through your experiences, your way of bringing things through in your relationship of what comes through, the light that comes through your being, how that light triggers something in what you're experiencing, and how the light of what you're experiencing triggers something in you. That's all you. That's all this living fractal patterning structure of your being. Well, what's a more poetic way of describing what I'm talking about? Well, it's the title of what the previous two courses were. It's your resurrection body. Your resurrection body is the awakened human divine creative capacity of the soul to fully participate in this ongoing human divine co-creative process through every realm of existence. But we can't do it all at once. It's much too big. At any given time, we're focalized on something in particular. Our consciousness is directed towards something, towards a particular way of unfolding an aspect of this relationship with infinite possibilities.
How about an example of what that would be?
Yes, just what I'm getting to. Glad you asked that. So, how can we make this more digestible? Well, you got to put something into the hopper. So if you want to use Google and you don't put anything in the search box and you hit enter, nothing's going to happen. You can't search for everything. You might as well search for nothing, because you're not going to get anything back. So let's put a divine quality into the hopper. Let's put beauty into the hopper. Okay? So if you're in your kind of default state of dualistic consciousness, you may be thinking, well, I'm going to tap into divine beauty and let it come down through me, or let it come to me from something else. And you got to start somewhere. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you open up more and more, you discover that you can enter into the relational nature of what beauty is about. And you will not only understand it much more deeply, you'll experience it much more deeply. And what can come through that beauty becomes much more. So the Sufis are always talking about triplets. I did a class that's on YouTube called The Threefold Nature of Reality. And it's about these triplets, that we are the seer, the seen, the act of seeing. We are the knower, the known, the act of knowing. We are the lover, love, and the act of loving. So let's say it's just seeing, okay? So it's not seeing like we usually think. I'm here and I'm looking at this rose and look how beautiful the rose is. We're in this relational experience, relational unity with the rose. And what's the conduit that's unfolding this deepening relationship? It's the divine quality of beauty. The beauty that comes to us through this Tawil experience with the rose, the beauty that's brought to the rose through us being able to experience the beauty of the rose, experiencing the beauty of us, experiencing, you can see it just, our language doesn't really have a simple way of describing this, but this dynamic process that's going on. So now beauty becomes the modality in which we are pouring something into this relational patterning of our being to understand and experience. And that could be the case with any of the divine qualities. It's opening them up. And as we've talked about before, it's actually transforming the quality itself. So our opened up experiencing of the divine beauty brings something to the quality itself. It enriches it. So the next time we experience beauty, it's become more beautiful. But even more amazing, the next time anybody experiences this divine quality, because we've added something to it, it's become more than what it was before. And in this way, the divine can pour more and more of itself into the expression of itself, into manifestation on every one of these levels, these plain, subtle levels of being. And each one of these levels now can enjoy a deeper relationship with the divine, these marriages. They can unfold not just through the individual souls, but you could say the collective, like the archangel of the earth now can awaken more fully to its relationship with the transcendent of the divine being through any particular quality. I'll make up a word, cosmic-sized beauty. So now it can be more than it ever was, through whether it's being experienced on a global level or a particular level in our own being.
Well, it's beautiful, and also I'm getting it. I'm getting a picture of it. And in fact, it reminds me of something that's going on in my life. Also, Habiba and Baraka, that the three of us take a walk every Wednesday in our wonderful park we have, or our wetlands, and we all love animals. And we decided that every week we're going to honor another animal. And this week is birds. And so we kind of put that in our hopper, as you said. And each one of us has different kinds of abilities and gifts and so much love for each other that we bounce back and forth and about birds. And I mean, even today, Baraka sent me a picture of a bird that somebody sent to her in the mail. So I'm not sure, these things can be manifesting in all kinds of amazing ways. But when I saw it, I thought of the Blackbird Song by the Beatles. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to sing this song and send it back. So I sent that back. And then actually today, I just realized that you and I, when we were out looking at the birds, we saw a blackbird, and maybe that influenced my wanting to sing the song. But this kind of bouncing back and forth, and then somebody will make a poem about it. I think Habiba made a poem about something about a bird today. And so our creativity is bouncing these things back and forth. So having friends really helps this process. I'll tell you that right now. And maybe even your buddy will be somebody that you're working with and start to pass these ideas, transformations along so that we begin to see a process. I don't know, does that remind you of what we're talking about?
Well, as I was saying, this process can operate on many different levels and crossways in the physical realm between people and in the horizontal dimension. But what we change in this fractal structure of ourselves, as I mentioned, changes everything and becomes available to everything else. And when people are tuned into each other, they're, and this is good because this is the next thing I wanted to get to. Well, let me use an analogy of like wherever you are in the room that you're sitting in, there are radio waves going through every cubic centimeter of space of every radio station, including TV stations and so on, and even the internet that's going through the airwave. All of that is every bit. Well, how come it doesn't all bump into each other? That's because each station has got its own particular frequency. Well, how could all this be going on and we're not aware of it? Because Just like if you have a radio receiver, if you have an AM radio, you're not going to be able to pick up FM. If you have an AM FM radio, you're not going to be able to pick up shortwave. If you have an AM FM shortwave radio, you're not going to be able to pick up gravitational waves from a black hole millions of light years away. You don't have the proper equipment for it. It's all there, but you have to have a receiver capable of attuning to that frequency. Pure Light used to say that it's possible to get into the consciousness of any being, but some beings are at such a high level of vibration, you have to become capable of getting to that altitude, so to speak, that fineness of vibration in order to reach them. You can't reach them from the level of vibration that you're typically operating on. So once again, we're talking about expanding the surface area, which is the kind of degree to which we've opened up dimensionality of our being. We can say another way of thinking about that is the capability we have of opening up to different realms of vibrational states, which is another way of thinking about the subtle planes. They embody different vibrational states. And all of those are part of us. I found this beautiful passage, little sentence from Ibn Arabi I hadn't seen before, even though I've read Alone with Alone, I don't know how many times, where he said that the creator, God, and the creature, the human, each exist in different dimensions. Well, okay, that's not too hard to agree with. But then he said, we are the totality of the creator creature. So, I mean, he says this over and over again, we are the whole thing. We've talked about the line that comes from that divine central sun that represents our soul, and we identify with being at one part of that line. Well, we are that whole ray. We are an embodiment of the divine being coming through in a way that's unique to each of our souls. And so becoming a human divine being means learning how to awaken to these different levels on which we exist. That's one necessary stage. Being able to function from that multi-level state of being with the circulation in our way of relating to other beings and not being spaced out so we can't walk around and function. We are totally grounded, but we feel a vastness of our being, and we don't feel like our being stops at the boundaries of our skin. We feel a great spaciousness in our being, and at the same time, we don't feel this hard separateness of ourselves and whatever it is that we're experiencing. We feel this openness and this capacity to direct the light of our being, to direct the light of consciousness of our being towards something in particular. So I'd like for us to share a practice together. And this is going to be a combination of three divine qualities. And the first, and you recall when we say a divine quality out loud, we invoke it. We say Yah, Y-A. So the first is Yah Hadi, H-A-D-I. Hadi means the divine guidance. So it's awakening to that spirit of guidance present within each of us. And then Yah Basir, which we've worked with before. Basir, B-A-S-I-R, means the divine seeing. But this is much more than the way we usually think of seeing. It's not like seeing out of our eyes, but now we're God seeing out of our eyes. Although Pure Light said that would be a stage. We are the eyes through which God sees. And then he says we become the divine glance. And this divine glance is this threefold nature, the seer, the seen, and the act of seeing in relationship to whatever it is that we are engaged in this process with. And this divine seeing, this basir, actually opens up or brings about the revelation of the deeper nature of whatever it is that we are experiencing in this way. So that's Yah Basir. And then the third one is Yah Wazi, W-A-S-I, but the S is pronounced like a Z. And different translations are all embracing, endless, and all reaching. So what I'd like us to consider as we put this combination together, Hadi, our guidance, tuning into our inner guidance, Basir, the divine seeing, and Wazi, this all-embracing, all-encompassing, is imagining this fractal relational patterning of our being permeating every level of existence, changing all the time. And now what are we salting it with or feeding into the hopper with? Here it is seeing, the act of divine seeing. And so our way of seeing brings about a never-ending revelation of more and more of the realization of the divine being from what is in manifestation. So it is a fulfillment of the divine purpose through the act of the divine sight. And it could be through compassion, it could be through any of the others, but here we're working with sight. So this is seeing in a way that opens up this fractal instead of just our usual fractal neighborhood. Now we're opening up to the vastness of who we are in relationship to everything else. And we can't see the whole thing at once, but now we're having more and more of a sense of what it's all about. So I'll say it out loud. At first it's Ya Hadi, Ya Basir, Ya Wazi. So I'll say it out loud a few times and then join with me and really feel this process happening. If it's easier, you might want to close your eyes as you're doing this because you want to see with the inner eye, the subtle sight. Ya Hadi, Ya Basir, Ya Wazi, Ya Hadi, Ya Basir, Ya Wazi. Join with me. Ya Hadi, Ya Basir, Ya Wazi, 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 Ya Hadi, Ya Basir, Ya Wazi. And then the fikr silently on the breath without thinking Ya. Think Hadi as you inhale, Basir as you start to exhale, and Wazi as you finish the inhalation. And then start again as you inhale again with Hadi. So inhale Hadi, start the exhalation with Basir, and finish the exhalation with Wazi at your own rate. And then letting go of the thought of the words and the meaning and just feeling.